Thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you're enjoying lunch on us. Please reach out to marketing@aspiretransforms.com if you do need any assistance in accessing your Panera codes. Additionally, everyone who has joined today will be entered into a drawing for an Apple Watch. So good luck, and you'll be contacted directly in the next day if you have been selected as the lucky winner. As a reminder, the incentives provided during the webinar are only applicable to commercial accounts due to the public sector guidelines. And throughout the duration of the presentation, if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We will take a moment at the end to address any questions that do come up. And with that, I will hand it over to Doug Stevens and Mike O'Connell from the Aspire side to kick us off.
Super, thank you, Katie. Are we recording this?
We are.
Fantastic. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Doug Stevens. I've been with Aspire for a little over 17 years, and I lead our managed services practice. So I'm going to kick things off today and then hand it over to Michael O'Connell. Michael is one of our security solution architects within our cybersecurity practice, and he's going to run through a lot of great content today. But before we get to that, I just wanted to level set, and for those that aren't familiar with Aspire and what we do, just give you 2 minutes on us and what we've become, I guess, known for in the marketplace. So three areas, really. The first is our systems integration business. We've been designing and implementing technology solutions for 18 years. And we take a very consultative approach and really try to understand what our clients' requirements are and what their business goals are, and then align technology to help them to achieve those outcomes. So we're in that sense, we're typically getting involved fairly early in the project lifecycle with capturing those requirements, helping to design that solution, and then staging and configuring and helping to implement those solutions as well. And then a natural offshoot to that systems integration business is managed services. So about 8 or 9 years ago, we started to take on the ongoing operational aspects of the solutions that we were delivering, right? So for those customers that either didn't have the skills internally or wanted to focus those limited resources on things that are more strategic to the business, we have a 24/7 network and security operations center here in our headquarters, where we're taking on the ongoing availability, performance, and security monitoring of those solutions that we deliver. And then the third piece is we're very well known in the industry for having really, really strong engineering talent. Senior team of folks that just bring a ton of perspective to the engagements where we're involved. And that expertise is really laid across all of the practice areas where we focus. So enterprise networking, collaboration, cybersecurity, data center and cloud, mobility, and IoT. Each one of those practice areas has subject matter expertise, not only on the pre-sales side with solution architects like Michael you'll hear from today, but also subject matter experts in each one of these technologies on the delivery side as well. And then we layer in a very strong PMO with PMP certified project managers, again, managed services to cover the ongoing operational aspects of that and availability, and then a very mature customer success team as well that's helping with things with along the lines of onboarding and adoption of the technologies that we're deploying. So today is a fun day because actually, let me just make sure this is advancing. So our heritage 18 years ago, we really started out as a boutique cybersecurity shop, and obviously we've grown much larger and broader from that. But cybersecurity is our heritage. It's in everything that we do. So today will be fun. So we're going to focus on security. Michael's going to lead us through a discussion and give us some visibility into the trends for 2023. And what's happening around the hybrid workspace and what that means to security. And then he's going to talk about and introduce the concepts of zero trust and what that journey to SASE looks like. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about the importance of monitoring and sort of that evolution of managed detection and response as a buzzword, evolving into what really is becoming a best practice from a cybersecurity perspective. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Michael O'Connell. Take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Doug. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. As Doug mentioned, my name is Michael O'Connell. I'm a security solutions architect here at Aspire. So I'm going to go through a couple things today, and this is the first of a mini-series webinar that will deep dive into each of the subcategories that I'm actually speaking on today. So if you have advanced questions, there is a chat that we'll do Q&A at the end. But as this series goes along, the feature sets that I'm actually going to dive into will be specified for each individual topic. So the first thing that I really want to talk about is how has the modern network and specifically security landscape changed? I'm sure everybody that's been in IT for a long period of time has seen specifically recently in the last 2 years that the legacy network solutions that are on your infrastructure, they constantly are requiring updates. Unfortunately, obviously, COVID happened, and a lot of people and organizations changed their approach to working, whether that is full remote, whether that is hybrid, whether that is now people coming back into the office, depending on your organizational plans. There's a lot of security systems that have additional vulnerabilities and access from the public world, whether that's vendors or cloud access. Some of the things that I kind of immediately associate and focus on is your integrations and maybe adoption to cloud-based products such as AWS, Azure, maybe a co-location. Maybe you have third-party applications that are API integrated into your existing production infrastructure. One of the biggest things is how do you monitor that? How do we continue to evolve with cybersecurity and our systems while making sure that we have a standard and requirement in place? From a remote work hybrid perspective, how do we protect our organization and our assets and our data from someone that used to maybe be in the office all the time to now being able to work remote? And regardless of whether they're home, they're at a campus location, a branch location, inside a data center, or if they're traveling, they could be at a Starbucks. How do we build out and scale our organization for our future cybersecurity and the modern network in the ever-changing world? Same thing from an on-premises and cloud-based perspective. How can we get to a single platform where I have a single pane of glass security management offering that gives me that data analytics-driven approach where I can make enforcement regardless whether it's in AWS or in Azure or Google Cloud infrastructure? Same from a SASE base. How do I do enforcement from data protection from an application protocol? So the biggest thing is we really need to gain more access and visibility across the board, and we want to do that in a couple different ways. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to introduce what many know as SASE. And what does SASE stand for? So SASE is one of the biggest buzzwords that's, if you Google it or if you're in any cybersecurity deployment, architecture, conversation, any presentation, obviously including this one, is what is SASE? So SASE is Secure Access Service Edge, right, is what that stands for. But what does the architecture comprise of? And depending on the vendor and what the products are in your organization, that can vary. But the biggest thing here to take away from it is it comprises of several key components. First thing that you want to do to adopt anything from a SASE perspective is to really look at consolidation of a multi-team and multi-tool set single approach. Right? We want to get to a API application automated driven platform where we can implement and reduce our security vulnerabilities without a large lift of staffing or required hours. Doing so is going to give you effective security and threat protection across the board. Biggest thing here, and I mentioned it before, is being able to regain that security controls and any kind of compliance and organizational data, saying that, you know what, I know my data is protected from data loss prevention, regardless whether it is in Box.com, Azure, AWS, whether we're using SharePoint, anything like that. Where are my users accessing it when they're located remotely or on the road or even in the office? How do I have the security controls in place to protect that hybrid architecture? More importantly, do I have the availability to support all of my devices and agents regardless of where they are? Do I have that granular control? Can I deep dive? If you ask me if Doug Stevens is working remotely today and he's accessing something on the Spire's network or a trusted resource, do I know, can I control, do I see where he is at all times? Do I, without having to impact the user and make sure that we have them in there? And in there, you build in that microservices-based architecture. Biggest thing too is we want to be able to roll this out and build our security and adapt our security to be flexible. Make sure that we're not adding large-scale deployment times. And from a management perspective, you want to kind of streamline this process, and that's where a lot of the automation comes into play. So there's 5 big components when you talk about SASE. The first is Zero Trust Network Access, ZTNA. And I will break these down. These are going to be the follow-up webinars for deep dives in each one of these. But the biggest thing to think about when you start talking about ZTNA, and that's referring to the network access, is we're requiring users and devices to provide explicit permission to access resources. So getting away from required VPN connections to access corporate assets. When you get to an Azure or cloud-based approach where you have that hybrid architecture, we want to make sure that we define specific explicit permissions to access the corporate resources. Being able to hide your private applications from unauthorized access. And that right there talks about a key component for anyone thinking about or going through a cybersecurity insurance audit perspective is MFA enablement, making sure that we do that 2-factor authentication directly in that ZTNA. The next key component here is software-defined wide area networking. So SASE really comprises of 2 key components when you look at it from a security compared to network overhaul. The biggest thing here is combining the reduction of need for VPN connectivity and being able to utilize non-traditional MPLS and WAN costly circuits, right? We want to be able to utilize and improve network performance while reducing your organization's total cost and providing that security visibility. The next one, and probably in my opinion, one of the most important ones is, especially with a cloud hybrid architecture, is a CASB or Cloud Access Security Broker. What is CASB? CASB is going to be your bridge between your users and your devices and any of your cloud applications. So whether that's O365, whether those other ones that I mentioned before. What we want to do here in a SASE architecture and next generation cybersecurity platforms is be able to control access and get granular from a data loss prevention perspective. Implementation of maybe some other acronyms you hear out there like single sign-on or SSO. Being able to offer our users and our organizations the options to streamline that process while also gaining additional security and control. The goal here is to make sure you block on all unauthorized access, regardless whether it's a device or a user, and gain that actual single pane of glass management. So if someone logs in from Asia Pacific under my account, well, I'm sitting in the New Jersey regional. I'm not in the Asia Pacific region. So I'll be able to streamline that process and automate that process with a managed detection and response offering, being able to control no matter where that is automatically without administrative overhead. The final part is really the next step is the firewall as a service. So as you go into a cloud, and a lot of times people just adopt a cloud solution very quickly. I know there was a large push several years back of cloud, everything. But taking a step back from where you're at in the SASE architecture right now really requires looking at, do you have the firewall in place at that security level? When you went to maybe a O365 or an Azure or AWS or any cloud-based, whether it's Google, any cloud-based architecture, do you have the same granularity from next generation firewall controls, whether that's web filtering, IDS, IPS, the advanced threat protection, and DNS protection at your cloud level? You have some servers sitting up there. Well, Do you have a corporate IDS, IPS layer 4 through 7 firewall and granularity into what's going on in your cloud architecture? Then the final part is the web gateway, being able to control the secure web gateway, being able to control and lock down, for example, remote endpoints. When someone leaves my corporate office and they're taking away from my legacy, I wouldn't say legacy, but normal on-premises actual egress, my firewall, my full protection where they're on my corporate networks, do I still have that same firewalling and actual lockdown capabilities from a web gateway perspective locally on the endpoint? The biggest thing here, and really what we want to talk about, and as I go forward with these webinars and deep dives, is being able to do this with minimal agents on the workstations, being able to provide that data and deliver that data with minimal to zero impact for your users, and being able to get that IP port application level granularity. The biggest thing, and I think that a lot of people, SASE is a journey, and it is a multi-step approach, and these are 5 key building blocks. But one thing that I kind of focus on, and as Aspire, we've been rolling SASE out for a long time, even before the process of COVID started. Any cloud adoption, this is something that people have started implementing, and it's kind of the framework and baseline of architecture here at this point. With SASE, the main advantage, and if I can stress it enough, it's going to give your organization the availability to essentially manage all of your network and your securities from one single platform, right? Whether it's the networking from an SD-WAN perspective, whether you're talking about, locking down an endpoint regardless of where they're at, whether you're talking about multi-factor authentications based off locations. One of the newest things that's coming out is device trust risk-based analysis, right? So depending on your MFA vendor, for example, you want to make sure that you're continuing on the trend of multi-factor and two-factor authentication where you're doing risk-based analysis, and it's no longer just based off someone approving a push to their phone or a call or a text message. You want to continue to evolve. Very similar, there's a lot out there now about passwordless authentication, and when someone from a legacy architecture sees passwordless, they're going to think, oh, well, that's password's key. Well, passwordless is actually more secure, and with that risk-based analysis, you actually have more granularity to be able to protect not only your users and remote access, but your assets and your application data as compared to that legacy Active Directory or single point of failure. So that is honestly a high level of the SASE architecture. As I said, I'm going to go into deep dives for each one of these, which from a technical deep dive is going to be invaluable. But that is my breakdown from the SASE architecture. So Doug, if you wouldn't mind, the next slide. So one of the biggest components, and people really struggle, and they ask me all the time, well, all I hear is SASE, or compared to Zero Trust. So what is the differences between SASE and Zero Trust? Depends on who you ask, where you look it up. Simply very easy to break it down, and depends on the vendor, right? But at the end of the day, there's a couple things that are key. Zero Trust is a framework that is part of a SASE architecture. So Zero Trust is your security framework, and that's going to give you the availability to verify along your network who the user and application and the device is who they say they are. So that is the framework of Zero Trust. As I mentioned, Zero Trust means different things to different people. For some people out there, it's segmentation of your organization, kind of that micro segmentation of networks, and that starts at the data center level, and then your office or your branch location and remote. Some people, it's just endpoint security, and Doug will deep dive into EDR and XDR and the differences there. But how do I implement Zero Trust, and where do I start? Identity. Zero Trust, identity is a critical part. All of these components that I'm mentioning here, whether it's endpoint security, network segmentation and visibility, identification of who the user are, firewalling, they all really component to a single pane of glass called ZTNA. And I mentioned that earlier on in the SASE architecture. So ZTNA, while is Zero Trust, right? Zero Trust Network Access. It is the framework from a security architecture. the actual delivery and component of ZTNA is part of a SASE overall actually implementation. So that is the biggest difference. One is a framework, the other one is an actual security architecture. So how do I start this process moving forward? What can Aspire do to assist with a SASE approach? So for anyone that's even attempted or dug into or thought about delivering zero trust or SASE, it's not a single size solution for anyone. Aspire, we're experts at customizing a SASE and zero trust approach. So we take a look and start at building an actual framework for your organization specific to your needs, whether that's a hybrid, whether you want to start on premises. Really, where do you want to start? What are the security tools you have in place? Do you have, a good endpoint EDR, XDR solution in your organization? Do you, what's your risk? We take a step back and look at, all right, so, over the last 36 months, 24 months, and more importantly, where are you going moving forward in FY 2023 and beyond? And we look at a future of 3 to 5 years here and say, where can we remove the risk for your business and your organization? Where can we protect the data that is important to your organization, whether that's PII information, but really let's take a look at the risks of your organization. I mentioned one of the biggest key components here is the central management and unified management of SASE, right? That is the back end. We want to make sure that we can provide your staff automation to help you streamline this process. You shouldn't have to log into 6, 7 tools anymore to get a security overhaul of what's going on in your organization. We want to simplify that security model for you from start to finish. We want to make sure that that automation, if there's a breach on an endpoint, we want to lock down that remote asset or that cloud-based application. We want to lock down that endpoint and make sure that a managed detection response incident is flagged and it's automatically remediated. We do not want things to spread across your architecture. One of the biggest things is integration of visibility and control from a network level. There's a lot of different options out there, but one of the biggest visibilities and lack of visibilities, I should say, is people's what's going on in your VLANs. Do you know what's happening in between your network, getting beyond just the endpoint or getting to that firewall when you're talking about on premises? Do you have inter-network control? Can you see what's being transferred between actual sites, between your branches, between your data centers, making sure that your architecture is scalable for the future and ease that process? By doing so, allowing your organization to be more agile, not spending time running reports and chasing false positives, making sure that you develop an architecture. One of the things that I kind of, and I'll segue you here in the Doug, adopting a SASE architecture, how does that impact your organization and what does that give me? One of the biggest things, and there was a study done, and it compares people with mature SASE implementations as to limited SASE. One of the biggest things is people that have adopted a SASE approach, where they're doing the automations, they're doing your MDR and your integrations there, they've seen that almost 40% are going to, with a SASE model, will have a stronger threat detection and incident response result. So putting these baselines and looking at the risk in your organization and building that framework is going to automatically increase, then reduce the reduction of your security vulnerabilities inside your workplace. So Doug, I think that with that 40% statistic, I think that's kind of a good segue here into obviously your piece here. I'm sorry if I stole a little of your thunder, but I want to tag you back over.
No, excuse me. No worries at all. I'll just pause there for a second and just check in with our host, Katie. Katie, are there questions that are in the Q&A that would pertain to anything with Mike, or should I carry forward here?
We'll touch on one that came through. We'll save the rest for the end. But you mentioned zero trust and SASE. Where does an organization start on the road to zero trust?
Sure. So that is a very good question, and I think that's both those acronyms scare people from SASE and zero trust. I would put together a call with myself and Doug and an expert partner, number one. And while you're doing so, you want to take a look at your existing security tools, helping to optimize it and take a look and building additional frameworks. So just like I said, from a zero trust that's based off a framework, the first thing you want to do is look at the risk of your organization and where's your blind spots. If I can give you one recommendation is to schedule that and do that deep dive, because then you can see where the risk is, and that's what's your P1, P2, P3 moving forward from a SASE and zero trust implementation.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I totally agree with Mike, and it's really engaging a partner that has the subject matter expertise to help you kind of figure out where you are today and where you want to get to, and then help you build out that roadmap, right? I mean, it can be daunting. All of what Mike went through today is there's a lot, right? It doesn't all have to happen at once. It can happen as part of a roadmap, and that's probably a good, sensible approach for many of the folks that are on this call today. So I'm going to transition into the conversation around managed detection and response. And Mike touched on it earlier. A lot of the point products and tools and security controls that are implemented within the environment are super, super important. But equally important is having the ability to monitor and interpret the alerts that come from those tools as well. And what we're seeing in the market, and we talk to a lot of people, is some of the common challenges that companies like those that are on the call today face is there's not enough security professionals out there, right? You can't find them, you can't afford them, they're difficult to recruit. The other thing is that the threat landscape is constantly evolving, right? It's very difficult to keep up. A lot of folks in IT wear multiple hats, and so it's really, really difficult to keep up with the complex nature of those threats. Since COVID and the hybrid workplace and the journey to the cloud, the attack surface has changed dramatically over the last 24 months, and that's brought forward new challenges in how to secure what that attack surface looks like today versus 2 years ago. And then the other two are not as common, but they're super important. And we see this a lot where companies have invested in the tools that Mike was talking about, but they have challenges around really interpreting and understanding what's a real threat and something that's worthy of more attention, and what's just noise, and being able to do that quickly. And sometimes it's around tuning the tools properly, but in a lot of cases, you get this overwhelming number of alerts. You're not sure what to focus on, and you get this notion of alert fatigue. And when that happens, things get missed, and that leads to a bad day. And then there's other organizations that realize they need to invest in the tools. They don't have the internal expertise to monitor them in any meaningful way, and so they make that investment. And really, that's what I want to emphasize is the tools are super important, but it's only half of the equation. The other part, and really to get the true value and return on your investment, is having that ability to monitor and respond to events in real time. The other thing that we've seen in the market is this the evolution of traditional managed MSSPs. It used to be that you would be monitoring firewalls or monitoring IDS, and you get an alert, and then the customer was then forced to interpret that alert and figure out what to do from there. That's become a commodity. Really, what customers are looking for today is a more heavy emphasis on the ability to detect and respond to those threats as a service, right? They want that. They want the visibility that Mike was talking about to identify threats, and they want an MSSP to really act as an extension of their IT team to do that threat detection, to do that analysis, and to respond to those threats to mitigate them. And they want that as a business outcome, right? And they want that outcome is, I want to minimize the time it takes to detect and then respond to these threats as they happen within my environment. And I want it as a service. I want to consume it as a service. And some of the analysts out there, I just mentioned Gartner because we have a relationship with them, and some of the analysis that they share in the market. There was a quote from 2000, some guidance in 2001, and they said by 2024, more than 90% of the buyers that are looking to outsource security services will be focused on threat detection and response. So that's leading towards MDR right there, and that was from 2001. And then last year they came out and they provided this strategic planning assumption, and that is by 2025, 50% of the organizations will be using MDR services for threat monitoring, detection, and response. So that adoption and that projection to me means that MDR is no longer, that buzzword. It's really becoming a cybersecurity best practice. And so why is the monitoring piece and really having the visibility into those security threats so important? And it's because there's a common misperception out there where, if I click on something, I'm going to get ransomware. And that's really not true. It's really cyber attacks like ransomware are not singular events. They're an ongoing process, and it's a multi-step process. And it typically encompasses, some type of infiltration, whether somebody clicked on something or downloading something unbeknownst to them. So that infiltration, then there's that reconnaissance phase, and then ultimately some type of exploitation. So while that's happening and while the bad actors are gaining that footprint, there's typically some type of lateral movement where they're trying to do things like get privilege escalation to take control of those assets. And the end game is usually one of two things, right? They're either going to try to acquire some of that sensitive data, through data exfiltration, or they're going to encrypt the files, right? Ransomware. And so what this slide is saying here is there's a research from Ponyman in 2021, and the scary thing that jumps off the page at me is that the typical time for an organization to identify and detect some type of threat within their environment is 212 days. And when you think about that, that's 7 months, which is an incredibly long time. So during that time, they're getting more control of the environment, doing more, doing more malicious behavior. And so the faster that you can detect and respond, is a lower impact to the business or lower cost to remediate. And it's just become so critical. And really, so the answer and what the market is seeing is MDR, right? And having that service as an extension of your IT team to provide that 24/7 visibility at the cloud layer, at the network layer, and at the endpoint, and have that overnight. You now have that maturity of security operations, right? So everything that MDR provider has built and refined over the years, all of the threat intelligence, the platforms, the tools, the expertise with the security analysis, all of that provides that outcome that we mentioned earlier, which is faster detection and the ability to respond to potential threats more quickly. And so, what is MDR? And this is a common, discussion. We talked to a lot of customers, and everybody has a different definition of MDR. So really, MDR by definition is remotely monitoring 24/7, threat monitoring, detection, and response, delivered as a turnkey experience that involves the people, the expertise, the processes, and all of those technologies, right? And then focused on a predefined technology stack, right? So the endpoints, the network pieces, and then the cloud. And that's what's represented here in the bottom of this slide in the blue box. Those are the foundational tools that make up your typical managed detection and response service. So at the cloud layer, there's DNS protection. At the network layer, there's next generation firewall. And then at the network layer as well is some type of ability to do network traffic analytics and being able to leverage behavioral-based technologies to identify anomalies that are outside that baseline, and then do further investigation there. And then the fourth piece is the big one, and that's the endpoint, right? That EDR solution. And the two things that tool set, those foundational tools provide that are super important is one that Mike was talking about, right? That those layers of protection, right? And the ability to block things that are malicious at the cloud, network, and endpoint layer. And then the other thing that it provides from an MDR perspective is so much visibility and context that gives a really comprehensive view into what's happening within that environment. And so MDR providers, they have their platforms and their technology stack that they use. We happen to use what we call Vigilance that ingests those security events and normalizes and correlates and analyzes them. And then all of the directives and rules and that we've built into that SIM engine allows security analysts then to be able to filter out the noise and then focus on the things that are worthy of further investigation. So there's typically some integration of threat intelligence into that as well. There's a lot of automation, and all of these things allow analysts to again focus on the things that are important, do that triage, and then follow a predefined run book or response playbook that allows them to follow a repeatable process to identify and respond to those threats in real time. So what does that look like in an architecture? And it's really, MDR is a turnkey service, right? So leveraging the tools that you've invested in within your environment, right? Having that mechanism and that platform to be able to be looking at those tools and the events in 24/7 threat monitoring, and then collecting those relevant logs and data and contextual information from across the enterprise, right? So at the home office, at branch locations, roaming when users are either at home or VPN or traveling, and then analyzing all of that telemetry, leveraging the platform and the technology stack, the SIM, the automation, the threat intelligence, the case management tools, that 24/7 team of security analysts and incident responders that are that extension of the customer's IT team to really to respond to those alerts and go through that motion of, number one, detection, and then that triage and analysis and focusing on things that are a potential issue that are worthy of more analysis, and then doing those investigations, and then being able to respond in real time through either working with the customer directly, taking steps on behalf of the customer. Maybe it's the middle of the night and you're going to isolate a host or do some type of account lockout or network blocking, alert the customer, and then regroup in the morning and say, hey, this is what we saw, this is what we did, and then this is what we recommend in terms of next steps. So again, just getting back to why MDR is becoming a best practice for cybersecurity, it's that outcome, right? It's that faster detection and consistent response that MDR as a service provides. So again, it's overnight. You sign on with an MDR provider, you have that maturity of your security operations, right? You can lay your head on the pillow at night and you know that there's a team that's doing 24/7 threat detection. There's a platform and all the tools that are going to be able to prioritize and focus on the events that are important. There's consistent response that's in place to be able to identify and respond to those threats in real time. And then there's that linkage with your team and the MDR provider. So there's that fluency in how you want to operate specifically and what steps the MDR provider may take or ones that you and your team want to take on your behalf. Again, utilizing all the tools that you've invested in previously and being able to respond to threats and mitigate those threats quickly. And doing all of this from an economic standpoint in a far less costly manner than it would take for you to build it yourself. And in many cases, depending upon the size of your organization, a lot of times it's less expensive than in hiring one security analyst. And the MDR providers, they it's 24/7, right? They don't go home at 5:30. They don't go on vacation. They don't go on holiday. So really, that's why MDR is becoming best practices. And I can't emphasize enough that the investment in the tools is super critical, but having that ability to identify and respond to those threats in real time is equally important. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I will say this, that, I think we threw a lot at you here today. Michael, myself, others in the team, others in the security practice, if you have specific questions or you want to discuss, some of the your unique challenges or the tools that you have in your environment, and you want to do that as a one-on-one, please reach out to us. You can use the email here or contact your account manager directly. We'd love to have those conversations and help you along that journey to SASE or MDR or wherever your requirements lead you. So with that, I'll pass it back to Katie, and I'm not sure if there's any additional questions that may have popped up since we last broke.
Yeah, I know we have a few minutes left. Let's see. There's a few that popped up. So can you expand on DNS monitoring for the cloud layer?
Sure. So depending on the deployment from a cloud layer perspective, right, you get away from that legacy, port 80, and more importantly, DNS, the advancement of, for example, secure web gateways. You're going to get the availability to do your kind of legacy URL traffic filtering, but more importantly, at the cloud layer, when I talk about one of the components of SASE being secure web gateway, you're doing port 80, but more importantly, you're doing inspection and decryption from a web traffic perspective at a cloud layer. You also get the availability in a SASE model with secure web gateway of doing data loss protection. So you're not relying just on DNS monitoring, but with the actual SWG or secure web gateway portion of SASE, you're getting your 8443 along with URL filtering and data loss prevention at the cloud layer, even before it gets down to the local workstation. Of course, absolutely. And guys, one thing sorry, Katie, one thing I did want to mention, so while I know I went through a lot and I said that, there's multiple other webinars coming, as Doug mentioned, if you have questions, follow-ups, things of that nature, or more importantly, from my side, if you say, Mike and Aspire, I started my zero trust and network access, or I started looking at secure web gateway. If you'd like to see a pilot, or if you want us to be able to stand up a pilot for one of these, or proof of concept for one of these technologies, please reach out to your account manager, as Doug mentioned, and that contact info on the Q&A right here.
Great. Thanks, Mike. I know we're coming up on just a minute left, but those of you that did join via phone, if you could just send an email to this email address, info@aspiretransforms, and just let us know that you attended, just so that we have you included for the raffle. Your cell phone number might not be coming up on the registration, so we just want to make sure everybody is included in the raffle. I think that's all from our side.
Well, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining this morning. I hope this was useful. And again, if we can help with any follow-ups or additional discussions and help you along that journey, we're happy to do so. But for now, thanks for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.